everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today, we're talking about one of the big ones, one of the most pivotal shows of Phish's 40-year career. Today's guest, Jeff Paradise, was at the first modern Phish Halloween show, October 31st, 1994, at the Glens Falls Civic Center, where the band played a three-set show that included the first musical costume, a full cover of the Beatles White Album in the second set. The show lasted about 5 hours, concluding at about 3:30 a.m. in a remote upstate New York minor league hockey arena. Jeff was in college in Ithaca at the time, bouncing around college towns to see Phish, frequently at the behest of his friends, since Jeff was the guy with the car. At this point of the band's career, being a college student in upstate New York or New England was a golden age of being a Phish fan. Chances were that if they weren't playing within a few driving hours this week, they would be next week. It's easy to look back now and see how monumental this show was. A band covering a double album of the most famous band in rock and roll history, and Jeff points out that even compared to other big Phish shows of the era, the historicity of this show was apparent even in real time. Anyone in the audience in Glens Falls knew that night they were witnessing history. So even more than that, we have more to cover about this 5-hour three-set show. So please join Jeff and I as we discuss Dark Side of the Moon fakeouts, mailing in postcards, and making it back to campus in time for class for October 31st, 1994 at the Glens Falls Civic Center. Jeff, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
My absolute pleasure. I am thrilled with the show that you picked today for a million reasons. I'm sure we'll get to all of them. But I'm surprised. I got to tell you, I've been producing this podcast for about 4 years now, and no one has picked this show already. It seems like low-hanging fruit. And for those of you listening at home who haven't paid much attention to the episode title, our guest today, Jeff Paradise, is here to talk about October 31st, 1994, Halloween, at the Glens Falls Civic Center, where the band covered all of the White Album in Glens Falls, New York. And I would have to suggest, Jeff, and tell me if you agree or disagree, that if any given fan with an understanding of the band's history had to make a top 10 list of, say, most important, I put that word in quotes because it means something different, or at least most consequential Phish shows throughout their history, this one would be on 99% of lists.
100%. Yeah, I mean, and it was one of those nights where you don't always know when you're witnessing history, but that night felt like it. And I think history has proven that it definitely was. So I'm kind of surprised nobody's wanted to do it before, although it wasn't that big of a room. So maybe, they weren't actually there. I think a lot more people say they were there than were actually in the room that night.
Yeah, and you know what? That also holds true for New Year's Eve 95 at Madison Square Garden. Even though that's as big a room as they'll play, you wouldn't believe it by the amount of people who said they were there. It's twice the size that it is.
I was there that night, but
all right, good.
From re-listening, I only remember about 20% of that show.
Fair enough. And for this show, for Halloween 94, Jeff and I figured it would take way too long to discuss the entire show. And we'll get into the length of the show in just a minute because it took almost way too long for it to even be played. But we figured it would be too long to go over 3 full sets of music, including a double album in the middle set. So Jeff was polite and selective enough to choose highlights from each set. So if you're here for a completist perspective, you might have to just listen to the show again or start your own podcast. Today, we're just going to pick and choose Jeff's favorite or most meaningful part to the show. But Jeff, before we get there, let's hear about you and who you are as a fan with the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Jeff, when was your first Phish show and what do you remember from it?
Well, technically, my first Phish show was on the Horde tour at Jones Beach in 92, but I remember nothing because I wasn't really there to see Phish and wasn't paying attention, so I don't count it. My first real show didn't happen until the end of 93. Over the course of my first year in college in 1993, I got into the band and then went to the part of the New Year's run in New Haven, 12/29/93. Planned to go and do the rest of the run, but anyone that was there that night knows there was a massive snowstorm that started while the show was going on, and I was driving an '84 Cadillac, and there was no chance that car was going to make it from there to the next stop in, I think, New Hampshire was after that. Whatever it was, a lot of people didn't make it. A lot of people ended up in snowbanks. I turned around and went home. So that was it for '93 for me.
Yeah, that seemed to be a trend of the bands in the early and mid 90s of New Year's runs. We're so used to it now that it's Madison Square Garden 4 nights, or, maybe Miami once in a blue moon. But it used to be one show or two shows in different venues across New England.
Yeah.
And it's not a coincidence that that motif of snowy nights, I've heard so many stories of those shows where people step out of the Coliseum or the venue and they have to debate, should I move to the next venue?
It was dangerous. I mean, I heard it on another podcast, might have been Tom Marshall, talking about when they got to the show the night after New Haven. Page was actually asking about fans, some of the hardcore people that he knew, did they make it? Did this person make it? Because it was rough. So I'm much happier to, sit in Madison Square Garden for 4 nights than, drive around New England in winter weather.
I have to ask, the Horde Tour, which for those of you who maybe are younger fans or more recently into the band, stands for Horizons of Music Developing Everywhere, if my memory serves correctly.
Something
Who
like
were
that,
you there
yeah.
to see?
I lived on Long Island at the time, 10 minutes from Jones Beach, and somebody got free tickets. I knew who Blues Traveler was. I knew who Spin Doctors were because they had already kind of had their MTV moments. And somebody had tickets, so we said, all right, let's go check it out. And I think that night Phish headlined, which wasn't normal for the rest of the Horde run, so they went on last. And I think we were kind of done at that point and not paying attention. Who knows what else was going on, so I don't count that as an actual show.
I have to ask, where on Long Island did you live? Because I'm from Merrick.
I'm from Merrick.
Oh, hey.
I went to Calhoun High School.
All right, I went to Kennedy.
Okay.
So same district, different high schools, but
Yep.
all from the same town. Very nice.
That's really
nice
funny.
to meet you.
You as well.
So if your first official show that counts for stats was all the way back in 1993, what was your
Yep.
most recent show? And what did you think of it?
My most recent show was night 7 of the MSG run. And it was great. That whole run was fantastic. I skipped one night just because I think I was exhausted. I think seven was too many for me. And I took one off. But yeah, night 7 was just kind of a love letter, it felt like, from the band to the audience, after that whole run. But yeah, it was a great time. And then I skipped SPAC. So
I did too. My shows this past summer, I should say, was all just the 7 MSG shows.
Yeah.
And it really did, at the end, to your point, it felt like a mini Baker's Dozen. I mean, it didn't have the scope, it didn't have the ambition. It was just 7 straight Phish shows. And I say just, in quotes, it's still a big deal to play 7 nights, not quite in a row, but it was the same schedule as the Baker's Dozen, right? 2 or 3 nights on, 1 day off, and then 2 more in the middle of the week. But by the end, it wasn't as exhausting, but man, was it fun. It still had that communal feel.
And they were firing on all cylinders for that whole run. I felt like, there were moments here or there, obviously some of the new stuff, you're going to have moments, but I mean, every show had just, powerhouse jams. And I think they were loving it. And the energy inside that room was amazing, as it always is at MSG.
Right. Since we're going over a Halloween show today, I've never really had the opportunity to ask this question. If you could pick Phish's Halloween cover album, their next one, what would you pick if you had absolute veto power?
That's a hard question. I feel like they're over the original idea of the musical costume at this point, and I'm kind of with them. There are amazing albums that they could cover, but I kind of like the sort of expanded idea of what they've made the musical costume into, with things like Casvot and Chilling Thrilling and, Sci-Fi Soldiers. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I like that creativity more than, let's do another album. Although if I, had to pick, I would say Something Zappa, just because they've never done a full Zappa, and I think that would be cool to see.
I agree with you. And that was the rumor in 95, I think, right? That when they had the fans vote, the rumor that I heard, the story that I've read is that Joe's Garage was the big winner, but they kind of looked at each other as a band and was like, first of all, technically, I don't know if we could pull this off with all the sound effects and all the different weird out of production requirements. But also, I think Page was like, we're just not going to sing some of these lyrics. Just absolutely.
That's fair. That's fair. I also, we, there's all, back in the 90s, there was so much speculation because you had so much less access and real information that we have now. But, there was a lot of people that were like, oh, they're never going to let the audience pick the album again after, having to learn 2 full albums. It was that was what people were talking about as well.
And I agree with you in terms of them being, if not sick of it, I don't know if that's the right phrase, but like done with the idea of covering another artist's album. Although I know they did the David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust after they kind of pivoted to their own music. But I think that was more out of tribute than out of a creative desire, I would suggest. But yeah, I agree with you. I think, and this is not necessarily, I don't know if it's a controversial opinion, but I do think that Wingsuit is probably the most important show that they've played in 3.0, other than their comeback at Hampton. I think it really changed the game, to your point, of what a Halloween costume could be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Sticking with the Halloween theme, what, aside from the White Album, what is your favorite Halloween show from Phish?
I might get flamed for this, but and I wasn't there in person, but Chilling Thrilling, I thought was, it's a brilliant concept. It's like, okay, fine, we'll cover an album, but we're doing it our way. And, the stuff that came out of that, like, I still love if I'm at a show and I get a Your Pet Cat or a Martian Monster, there's great tunes that came out of that, that experiment or whatever, that project, whatever you want to call it. So I thought it was pretty awesome.
I agree. And I remember the thrill of trying to get access to it. If I remember correctly, there was an issue with the broadcast and it was available for free on YouTube for everybody. I remember being in my downstairs and just trying to access it. I couldn't. And then all of a sudden you could refresh it and you saw the whole thing. I think the theatricality of it took Halloween to another level compared to previous years when it was just the 4 guys on stage playing.
Yeah. I've watched it since. I didn't watch it in real time, but I've gone back and watched the whole set, and it was the set and the performer. It was great. It was great. It was like a full set long New Year's gag with all new music.
Looking in the other direction, what would be your least favorite Halloween show?
Didn't love Sci-Fi Soldier.
You're not the first person to say that. What is it about Sci-Fi Soldier?
I mean, I thought it was a little hokey. The show the night before was great with all the planting all the seeds and setting the stage for it. There's only a couple of those tunes that that I really still like hearing. Maybe, I don't know. It didn't do it for me.
A lot of people say that. I wonder if being there for a lot of people is also part of it, because from what I remember reading in the reviews and the online chatter is that it was very physically uncomfortable too, that it was overheated and there was no ventilation. Maybe that kind of cursed it in a way. Who knows?
Well, that was the case in the show we're about to talk about as well, but that didn't stop any of us from having a good time.
Fair enough.
Granted, I was also in my I was 19 as opposed to in my 40s, so I could handle it back then better than I can now.
To wrap it up, what is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
It's such a hard question because I think the idea of going to a Phish show is nothing is weird. It's come as you are, do what you like as long as you're not hurting anybody. But actually, earlier in '94, it was a great show that nobody talks about because there's minimal soundboards and no official release, and it was an amazing show with another Harpua in it in Richmond, Virginia, and it ended up being a free show. There was no staff at the gates. Like we got there and started looking for tickets in the lot, and somebody was like, "Oh, there's no one there. You can just walk in." And we walked in and then walked back out and hung out in the lot. So I think people, I don't know, the whole thing was bizarre. But this woman comes in and sits down in our section. She had to be in her 80s. She was by herself. She just sat in a seat, barely moved, watched the whole first set, didn't do anything, say anything, and then stood up and left. It was just like I don't know what somebody would think of that after, watching this band, but who knows who she was, why she was there, what was going on. I don't know. But that was a weird one. And I've seen all kinds of people doing crazy things at shows, but that I don't even really catalog those as memories. It's
Right.
like, okay.
Well, if you ever see her again, if she's still alive,
Unlikely.
tell her to get in touch with me because I would love to have her on this podcast.
That would be a great episode.
When was this show played?
Well, today's show played on October 31st, 1994. As we discussed, it changed the concept of how, I wouldn't even say just Phish, what is possible with Phish, but jam bands as a whole. How they approach special holiday shows, where now a spectacle, or at least even a theme, is now expected. It wasn't just, oh, I'm going to see a band on Halloween. Now it's, you're going to a 3+ hour show on Halloween, and you expect something a little more from the band. A little more than them just wearing, a plastic Halloween mask. Now the whole performance itself has to be thematically tied to Halloween somehow, or a costume. It's not just the date is October 31st. So this was a big deal in terms of not just the Phish world, but the wider live music world. But for today's conversation, we'll mostly stick to Phish. Looking a little bit bigger, the Fall '94 tour started on October 7th at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, PA, which also featured the debut of Gaiute, although not in its finished form. It would be toyed with and played around with for at least another year until about Halloween '95. It would finally arrive.
Which I was there for that show as well at Lehigh.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And we had no idea what was going on when they played Gaiute.
I bet. That's like when I went to see, I forget what year, it must have been 2015. I went to see them and they played Mercury and it was brand new. And I had no idea what they were doing. My future sister-in-law thought it was like 3 different songs. So they played Gaiute at that first show of the Fall '94 tour. They also played that acoustic version of Foreplay Long Time. Do you remember that?
Absolutely. Because that was also the era. I don't remember if that was before or after the Acoustic Army. I think that predated Acoustic Army, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it predated Acoustic Army, but I think it was after they had the Reverend Jeff Mosier on tour with them. It was like right around there. But anyway, after the beginning of the tour, they played mostly through the Southeast and the Northeast, literally like up and down the coast. And although the tour eventually went west, it didn't end until the first week of December. So it was 46 shows. The centerpiece of the whole tour was today's show in the Capital District town of Glens Falls, which for all intents and purposes is Albany. It isn't, but as you and I, as New Yorkers, know, but for anyone outside of it, it's basically Albany.
It's the middle of nowhere outside of Albany.
Right. So, and again, also just a little bit of dots and trivia pieces for this tour. The band hosted several guests on stage throughout October specifically. They had members of the Giant Country Horns, Carl Gears, Michael Ray in New Orleans, Bela Fleck in Nashville. Even Dave Matthews Band opened for Phish, had the rare opening slot in Alabama before coming on with them in the encore to play The Maker which they wouldn't play again until a couple years ago in Mexico. Looking at today's show on Halloween, it was announced in the Donnerstag Weiss, the newsletter, that Halloween would be a 3-set show. And here's a quote directly from the newsletter. After a 2-year hiatus, Halloween is back on the tour docket. This year's show will be a 3-set affair beginning at 10 p.m. sharp. For this occasion, we need your help. We need your seasoned sagacity and impeccable taste to help pick out the ideal costume for us. That is a musical costume. Think of any album from any genre, anything from Slayer to Sun Ra to West Side Story that you'd like to hear Phish play. They then provided a P.O. box for people to send their suggestions, and then they closed with, we'll pick from the most popular suggestions and play the album or most of it sometime Halloween night. My favorite part of this, after reading that, I had never read it until I was getting ready to speak with you today, is that they didn't tell the audience or the crowd that it would be in the middle of the show, that it could be played anywhere, anytime. That's nuts.
Yep. I mean, the whole thing was still surrounded in mystery, even though they said kind of what they were going to do. Nobody knew what was going to happen.
And the fact also that it started at 10 p.m. or it would start at 10 p.m.
Yeah, so tickets actually said 9:30. Which we were confused about and kept asking each other, like, is this right? Is this real? And then you could refer to that and say, no, they said it show starts at 10, but the tickets themselves were printed 9:30.
I can't imagine. And you said you were 19 at the time?
Yep.
All right. I could see my 19-year-old self sticking with it. But now, like, I'm in bed. I get up at barely 6 o'clock a.m.
I'd have to take like a 4-hour nap in the afternoon to even think about attempting it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you are preparing to take in a lot of Phish music and some non-Phish music.
Mm-hmm.
And with that 3-set show starting at 10 p.m., it should be said now, we'll go from backwards design, the end at the beginning of the conversation. The concert ended at 3:30 in the morning.
Yep. And I don't think we got out of the parking lot until closer to 4:30. And then we had to drive over 3 hours back to Ithaca, where I was going to college. You know, the sun was up, sun came up while we were driving home. And, it was close to, 7 something, close to 8 o'clock. I think we got out of the car and went right to the dining hall for breakfast.
Yeah. That's what I did after Coventry. Drove all night home and stopped at the Merrick Townhouse Diner on Sunrise Highway for pancakes.
It's down the block from where I grew up. I grew up on Lincoln Boulevard.
Yeah, I know exactly where that is. So let me ask, I know you said you were 19. You just mentioned that you were in college in Ithaca.
Yep.
In addition to that, who were you? Where were you in the fall of 94 that led you to this show?
So, as I said, I started getting really into Phish in 93, and then 94, I was fully in. I was off the deep end. I did a good chunk of the 94 summer tour. That was kind of how I spent my summer vacation. I worked for the beginning of summer break, saved up a bunch of money, and then went on tour and did most of the East Coast swing from that Richmond, Virginia show we talked about all the way up to Sugarbush. We would just, I wasn't a good Phish head. I wasn't good at it, but I had friends that were, so like that Lehigh show, somebody was like, hey, we're going to Lehigh. Can you drive? And I had a car and everybody knew I was down to drive anywhere. So I'd get tickets. They go, oh, we got tickets. Come on, let's go. Okay, great. Pile in. And off we went. So I think that I'm pretty sure that's how I got my ticket for that night as well.
And were you at Cornell? Where in Ithaca were you in college?
Ithaca College.
Ithaca College, right.
Yeah.
And so the early 90s, I've said this on previous episodes, but to be a college student in upstate New York in the early 90s, that was a great time to be a Phish fan.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there had to be, 100 plus diehard Phish heads on a relatively small campus that was Ithaca College, so shows in the area, I remember like Binghamton, they played Binghamton and we knew you just knew people all over the place. The parking lot was a party with all of your friends,
Right.
and everybody had friends that went to other upstate or New England area schools, and it was just, it was everyone converged. It was a great time, actually, especially in that area, and they would play a lot around there. So
Right. And the fun part of it is they wouldn't outgrow that for about another 2 years
no,
or so, give or take.
something I didn't even remember that I saw when I started kind of reviewing, trying to put my recollections together for talking about this night, was that this show was on a Monday, and we went and saw them in Syracuse on Friday of that same week, which was another amazing show with a Forbin Mockingbird.
Gee, and that was at another 3 hour drive or 3.5 hour drive.
No, Syracuse was easy. Syracuse was like an hour.
Oh, wow. Okay. I must be
Yeah.
off on where in my head Ithaca is in central New York, right?
Yeah, it's the Finger Lakes, sort
So it's
of.
farther north than I thought.
Yeah, it's Binghamton's 45 minutes, Syracuse is 45 to an hour. So those shows were easy. This was a little more of a drive. You mentioned it was at night. Remember, the show starts at 9:30, 10 o'clock. So we were driving there at night. So it's
Right.
it's Halloween, and we're driving to the show. It's already dark. It's not like, now typically you arrive at a show, before the sun goes down. And I'll never forget, we drive from Ithaca, we're pulling up to the venue, and we were pushing it. We were running kind of late. So, was not like one of those get there early and have the whole lot experience nights. And there was this crazy fog. So it was already spooky before we even get to the show. It's dark, it's foggy. It felt like literally the middle of nowhere because you're on small roads leading up to the venue. So it was already very Halloween before we even got there.
Man, leave it to a bunch of fish heads to be late for a show that starts at 10 p.m.
We had classes and stuff, and then everybody had to get together, people putting their costumes together still.
Did you dress up?
I did not. I was not a big dress up person. It was also, I don't think I knew I was going until that day. So I did not plan ahead, but everybody else, well, most of the other people in my car did have costumes. I shared a costume with my friend Claire, who was in the car, who grabbed the ice tray out of her dorm fridge and just carried it around. And if somebody asked what our costume was, it was, it's ice.
Right. Perfect.
But some people went all out. And actually, a friend of ours from Ithaca College went on to win the costume contest.
Oh, it's at the Mounds Bar?
Yep. Skip McFarland.
Yep. So let me ask, to wrap it all up, when you first contacted me, as happens often with guests who want to be on the show, but they're not sure what they want to talk about, you provided a number of possible shows. What put this one over the edge? Why do you have attendance bias toward Halloween 94?
It was everything about that night. Like I just said, it started before we even got there. It was like the universe set the stage for this experience. Like I said, I was at New Year's 95, incredible night, incredible show. This was a different experience. It was otherworldly. The anticipation, the vibe, the crowd, everybody in costumes, everybody just there, to go all in. And the band, something not everyone knows, Trey was actually right inside the door. We didn't know. We walk in the door to the venue when we got there, and there's this guy we thought it was a Jerry mask. And then there was, discussion. Is it Jerry? Oh, no, it's Fluffhead. But there was this dude there handing out chocolate coins that I wish I'd saved because they sell on eBay for a lot of money now. But it was a chocolate coin stamped with, Phish Halloween 1994, just some guy handing these things out. Little did we realize when he walked out on stage in the exact same outfit, so Trey's there, it was this tiny little venue, the energy inside there. And then we were in there for, over 5 hours. So, not just the people I went to the show with, but the people we met, sitting around us. Like it was it was one of those, like we're all in this together collective moments that is, I think, what the band intends every show to be. They talk about that collective experience. This was that on a whole different plane. And, I'll never forget that night.
Set 1.
So cutting over to the show, as I mentioned at the top of our conversation, we don't have the time to go through every single song, but we picked highlights, or really rather Jeff picked highlights, and I was thrilled with every single one of them that stood out to him or stood out in his memory for some reason, and we'll hear about each reason why. Set 1 has, at least to me, you picked 2 songs that have, if you made, talk to the guys at Phish.net, probably have like a top 5 version of each, in my opinion, at least. But the first one that we're going to talk about is the 4th song in the set, 4th song of the show, Divided Sky, which is greeted with huge cheers. Divided Sky, to me, reached, if not its high point, at least a high point in 1994. And this one is one of the best of the best. I don't know, there's fluidity in the guitar line. Even though I've heard it a zillion times before, it's just fast, it's precise. And I really appreciated that it became truly silent in the venue during the pause. It was small enough.
Yeah, I mean, it was, but it was also, I think everybody was just mesmerized at that point. They open with this explosive Frankenstein, and then run through a couple songs, and then we hit this Divided Sky, and it was, there are moments of magic in there when you listen to it, and it really did kind of just, everybody was there. I'm sure there was a couple people here and there that yell during the pause because somebody has to, but was not a lot of that.
Well, when you consider the size of the venue, and I'll have to do the fact check, it can't be that big because, as we mentioned earlier, it's in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. It's a civic center, right? So it's not only a concert venue. And 2 months later, they would be playing Boston Garden.
Yeah. Well, and it felt like the stage was moved up pretty far. It wasn't like they maximized the number of seats in there, because we were seated, it's only one level of stands and then a floor. It's not like there's no second, 200 level like at MSG. So it's, imagine just the 100s. And we were at the very back, and we could see faces of the band. So, even sitting almost as far away as we could have been, it felt like we were very close. And the whole place was a pressure cooker. And, during some of these peaks, it was like the roof was going to just fly right off of that little arena, which would have been nice because it was really hot in there.
What I like about when you mention all these different peaks, when I was listening, and I've heard this a billion times, this set was my go-to set. Speaking about upstate New York and driving around, I went to college in Buffalo. And so I-90, the highway, went straight from Buffalo, straight through Syracuse, all the way to Albany in a straight line from west to east. And whenever I would visit my friend in Albany, the first disc I would always put in would be set 1, disc 1, when the live Phish albums came out of Halloween 94. And this Divided Sky, then later we'll talk about the Reba. it just seems like there's endless energy.
Mhm.
It's like, I don't know, like a fusion reactor. Like you just need one track to power the whole first hour of the drive. And it just, starting at 10 o'clock, you could hear it in Fishman and Trey's playing. It seems like every minute, the energy and the intensity gets exponentially crazier than the minute before.
Oh, yeah.
It just doesn't get any better.
It was a lot of the night felt that way, at least that first set. We'll talk about the second set after that, but that whole first set, like there's Horse Silent, Cooler in the middle of that. Yeah, they were on. It was energy. It was, they were excited. You could see that they were just pumped to be there and be doing this. And they were, they had a lot of energy and the audience had a lot of energy. And it was pretty magical. And just every time I go back and listen to this, it's the precision, in all of them. I hate to use the word perfect, but like there's so much perfection that's in here, that it's kind of magical.
The next track that you chose was the next song that they played, or the next suite of songs, which was Harpua into Vibration of Life back into Harpua. And again, if Divided Sky was the fourth track or the fourth song of the set, then you're going to go right into Harpua in set one. It's like, blow the show wide open.
Yeah.
Why don't you?
You know, they peek out this, almost 15-minute, Divided Sky, which doesn't sound long, I guess, in thinking about now. But remember, there's no type 2 in there. That was, Divided Sky. It was the long build to a massive peak. They hit the end of that. We're going crazy. The whole crowd's going crazy. And then the next thing you hear is Pa.
Yeah.
It's just like, wait, what? What's happening? And yeah, like we're 5 songs into this epic long night, and they're already whipping out Harpua.
Do you remember what any of the rumors or hopes were in terms of speaking with other fans, or maybe just amongst your friends, knowing that they're going to play something some cover album or a portion of it leading in?
Oh, there were tons of rumors, of course. Yeah. I mean, the part of the voting, I think, was public. I think there were people talking about that it was like Dark Side of the Moon. Maybe, I heard the White Album mentioned, but I dismissed that. Sergeant Pepper, and then there was, of course, like we still get now, oh, they're going to do Gamehenge, because that was the summer where they did Gamehenge twice, in that same year, which I caught one of those as well. 94 was a good year for me.
Sounds like it.
But yeah, there was time, everything was rumors. That whole night was rumors. People were like, this band's going to show up, this other band's going to show, it was who knows, the sky was the limit for what people were expecting to happen, and here they are delivering, straight out of the gate.
Speaking of Gamehenge, that's the big portion of this Harpua narration, where Trey says it was 99 years ago tonight that this story took place. Everything was great. It talks about Gamehenge. It was a beautiful, lush, tropical area with green forests and a mountain. He pretty much Gamehenge in Trey's head is Vermont.
Yeah,
it sounds like.
Well, at least the idyllic version of Vermont for sure. Everything was great until it got a little weird.
Well, yeah, because it's Halloween, right? Yeah. Trick or treat. You got to have some tricks. That there was a man in town who hated all the people, and he moved away. He and his dog started to feel a strange vibration, which led into the vibration of death, because the vibration of life had a big showing in the fall of 1994.
Mm-hmm. Yep. They'd done it multiple times. I think I'd seen one already. They did a Vibration of Life jam, 7 beats per second. And he starts going into that, talking about it, but then it's Halloween. So we get the vibration of death. And, maybe it's the mood of the night, maybe it's the substances, maybe it's everything, but it was spooky. It was, I wasn't scared, but like my friend was, and, she was holding my hand, and it was like, they're earlier in the year, actually at that Richmond show, they did a Red Rum jam in the middle of one of the songs. And I think they'd done that a couple other times. And like, there was the vibration of death and screaming, and, it was spooky. It was actual, really spooky.
One special day, they start to feel this strange vibration coming out of the ground. He's walking along in the woods, and he starts to feel the ground beneath his feet start to vibrate slightly. I think that we can kind of recreate that for you if you... living up in the woods, and he had come across a strange, the universe was kind of in line, and he had come across what we like to call the vibration of life. 7 beats per second. He felt it underneath his feet, and he could feel it. But the strange thing was, on this particular day, being that it was the first Halloween ever, the vibration of life had something strange going on to it, and the spirit of Satan and the evil people beneath him and all the evil spirits in the world had somehow gotten in the way of the vibration of life. And suddenly he found that he was actually standing up above the vibration of death. So the vibration of death was vibrating beneath the old man's feet and the dog and everything. And he's standing there and the dog starts wandering into town. Now meanwhile, somewhere in the town, there's this young kid named Jimmy. And Jimmy is living in this suburban house. And for a while there during the day, he thought everything was great, he's feeling good. And he starts to be affected also by the vibration of death. So on this particular day, he's standing there, he's in his living room, and he decides to put on his favorite album, Barney's Greatest Hits.
And before we get to the rest of it, though, speaking of spooky and demonic, which is another adjective that I think I've heard people use to describe this set, the story of Harpua goes that Jimmy puts on Barney's Greatest Hits. And for those of you listening, if you're old enough, like Jeff and I, you may remember a time when Barney was at his zenith at this time, like tapes and, home videos and all that. So Jimmy puts on Barney's Greatest Hits, but he puts it on backwards and it turns into War Pigs, where Fishman, to his credit, you don't get to say this very often in the early 90s, vocally nails it.
Nailed it. Absolutely.
The strange sound comes out. This is a strange sound of Jimmy. Jimmy had no idea what was coming out of his speakers. He was expecting to hear, I love you, you love me, we're a happy family. And all of a sudden, here comes this song out of him. So he's standing there, and he really starts to feel the vibration of death creeping below him now at this point. Now, what he doesn't notice is that behind him, his cat, his favorite beautiful furry cat.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. And I have to admit, I'm sad to admit, I hadn't been exposed to that much Sabbath. So I didn't really know the song. I recognized it a little bit, but I was a little confused by it. But just the song is, since then I love that album. It's amazing. Probably this moment kind of, nailed it for me. But when he goes into War Pigs, the place just explodes. And then, of course, that adds to the rumors of what's going to happen.
Right. I wanted to ask, were you sucked in? Did you get faked out?
I didn't think they were going to do that. So, some people were like, oh, maybe that's it. They're going to just do the whole album right now. But then he doesn't even do the whole song. They do, basically the first voice into the drum fills with which Phish nailed those, Fishman nailed those fills and the vocals, like you said. It was pretty great.
Right. You had to finish Harpua, which is more akin to November 2nd, 98, when they did play Dark Side of the Moon within Harpua, and then they have to finish it at the end of the album. In this case, Jimmy's cat walks out the door and won't come back, says Trey, and then is sucked into the pits of hell. Sorry.
That doesn't get killed by Harpua like he usually does. He falls into the vibration of death, never to be heard from again.
Closer.
That's okay. Jimmy will get a dog. So
right. He doesn't want a goldfish. Of course not. Closer to the middle of the set, toward the second half of the set, the band plays Reba, which is another top of the top version. If you had to pick 5 Rebas from their history, I wouldn't be surprised if most Phish fans chose this one as one of them.
Absolutely. It's, again, we come out of the Harpua, a little bit of a cooler, and then here we go again. And it's just, how much are they going to do in this, first set of this long night? The jam aside, just the actual, composed portions of Reba, listening back to it, I don't think he misses a note. again, I hate the word, but perfection. There's just precision in there, and all of them, not just Trey. They absolutely nailed it. And then it just goes into another realm.
Yeah, my first thought when listening to it kind of mirrors what you just said. I almost take it for granted how exact they were in 1994. Like they were, like I'm sorry, perfect in most of their composed sections. They just were. I mean, imagine I was listening to this track in preparation of our conversation, and I had the thought: imagine if they played Reba like this today, just the composed section, not even the jam. And it's not to say they can't play Reba. Like, of course they can, but not at this speed with this dexterity at the same time.
No. Every single note is just nailed by all of them. And and then they get through that, and then we get into the jam. Not to jump ahead, but
we're at that spot. Yeah.
Listening back to it, and what I remember, like I said, and I've said multiple times, it was hot in there. And at this point we've been on our feet the whole time, and then they just chill it out. And there's so much patience in the beginning of this Reba jam. They're just taking their time. They're not in any rush, which they should be, because it's 11 o'clock at this point and they're in set one, and they're ready for it, and they air it out, and they let it build, and they let it, develop. And it was this like a beautiful, cool breeze came through the room. And then it takes off, and I don't even know, you could count the peaks in there, but this is before Kuroda did white light moments, but there would have been, I don't know, 6, 7 of them in that jam probably. It just sounds like Trey just wasn't ready to be done. He just wants to keep going and keep going higher and higher and higher.
Which is fun, because to what you said at the beginning of the jam, either they're not sure what direction they want to go in yet, or maybe they just don't want to rush it, and they vamp for a minute or two. Yep. And Trey just kind of picks out a melody at around 6 minutes, which is unusual for 1994. In 1994, there's barely 10 seconds where Trey isn't playing.
Yeah. There was less machine gun. We got the machine gun. He opened the hose multiple times this night, but there was no rush. There was I feel like now they would have gone from that moment, and then we would have gone straight into some crazy 10-minute type 2 exploration of something. But here it was just we'll get there. We'll get there. It's coming. Let's let it build. See what happens.
And they do.
Oh,
At
yeah.
around 12 minutes or 12 and a half minutes or 13 and a half minutes, this is a running theme throughout tonight. I did the same thing with Divided Sky. Every time there was a big peak, I wrote down the timestamp, and toward the end of Reba, it was like 10 in a row.
Yeah. Yep. It builds, it slows down, it builds, it slows down, and then it builds and builds and builds, and then there's that long slow build at the end of it. I think from like 11:30 on all the way through for the next 2.5 minutes is just this build to a peak, and it's like, is it going to stop? Is it going to stop? Until it finally just maxes out. I think they were tired too, because there's a long pause before they go to the whistles. I think they needed a moment to compose themselves as well.
Set 2.
So the first set ends after another couple of songs, and then we're getting ready for set 2, what this show is probably most well known for, when they cover all of the White Album. Before they started with Back in the USSR, I have to ask, what was your opinion at the White Album at the time, or how familiar were you with it?
I owned it. I had a copy. I definitely listened to it a bunch. It wasn't my favorite Beatles album, and the Beatles weren't, I love the Beatles, but they weren't my favorite band. So I didn't know every track on it, verbatim. I mean, none of us did, but we can talk about that as we get into the middle of it. It was like, wait, what else is on here? How many, because there's so many songs.
Yeah,
you can't remember all of
Bungalow
them.
Bill. Like, that's not exactly track 1A of your mixtape.
But I probably hadn't listened to it in a while. But yeah, I had an appreciation for it for sure.
Yeah, we talk a lot, either on this podcast or just as Phish fans, about Phish kind of opening your ears to bands or different styles even that you weren't previously familiar with. I can't imagine there are many people in the building who didn't know the Beatles, of course, or didn't know the more famous tracks from the White Album.
Of course.
But like you said, there's a lot of content on this album.
Yes.
So I think anyone could be forgiven for not knowing every single song. You know, there's maybe 6 or 7 songs, which is a lot for any album that people would know just on like the back of their hand, even if you're not a huge Beatles fan. Like everyone knows Obla Di Obla Da. Everyone knows While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Back in the USSR, Revolution. You know, there's a lot of songs that people know, but this is the reason that I really became soaked in the White Album.
Yeah. I mean, and there's, you know, what is it? 20 something, almost 30 songs.
Yeah.
On there.
And
or
some
30...
aren't even really songs.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's dense. It is a dense piece of material. Absolutely.
So the album opens with, well, not the album, but the lead up to the opening of the album. Phish, or I guess Paul Anguidoc, played the opening of Dark Side of the Moon. That kind of climax to it right before, is it Speak to Me and Breathe, that opens the Dark Side album, but he fakes out at the last moment. And then there's the recording of Ed Sullivan introducing the Beatles for their first big famous, the one that everyone knows, you know, 4 young gentlemen from Liverpool. And they go right into Back in the USSR, which was a great fake out. You know, this band sounds like, you know, never trust a prankster, to paraphrase another band we know.
So in the room, I have to say, I personally was pulling for Dark Side. That was my choice. I'd sent in a postcard for Dark Side. That's what I wanted to hear. And there was instant recognition in the room when we heard that recording. We're like, oh, they're doing Dark Side. They're doing Dark Side. That's what it's going to be. That's what it's going to be. And the place was going nuts. So you could barely hear, at least where I was, we could barely hear the Ed Sullivan intro, but it was like it stopped. And then you heard, you know, you knew, because I'd listened to Dark Side so many times, you knew it wasn't what you were supposed to be hearing when the Ed Sullivan intro came in, but we couldn't hear it clearly. And then they go into back in the USSR. It was a moment of like real disbelief. It was like, wait, what just happened? What's going on? I don't understand. And then you settle into the song because it rocks, you know.
Yeah.
It's a good rocker.
And I had that thought. It's good that this album opens with such a recognizable song, because in future years, and I'm the biggest Who fan, when they played Quadrophenia, the opening of Quadrophenia is just, it's a song on the album called I Am the Sea, but it's really just sound effects of waves crashing and different themes from the album, kind of like Dark Side in a way, like just kind of floating in and out. And you could hear it on that recording, that audience recording, I should say. It's not that enthusiastic. Most people don't know Quadrophenia. They're not excited for like this killer opener. But back in the USSR, Phish sounds confident. They sound practiced. And it's a song that most people know.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it rocked. It was a definite rocker, got the crowd up, you know, we're all, and then it's like, okay, this is, this is the White. Yeah, it's the White. Okay, it's the White Album. Okay, cool. Okay, so they're doing the White Album.
And we'll skip a few tracks ahead to, I think it's the 7th song on the album, when they play While My Guitar Gently Weeps, the George Harrison song. So
Yeah.
on this one, the band has their work cut out for them. It might be the best song on the album. I don't know if it's the best known song on the album, but it might be. It's yeah. Go ahead.
I remember, we were taught, because they do Back in the USSR. Dear Prudence is another one that comes right after it that everybody knows. But then you get into Glass Onion, Obla Dee, Honey Pie, Bungalow Bill. So like Honey Pie, Bungalow Bill, we were just chatting at this point. There's like weird stuff going on. And it was, the whole thing is my issue with it live in person is it's short song break, short. Most of these songs are 1.5, 2 minutes, they're short. So there was a lot of downtime and we're just kind of chatting and we're like, wait, are they going to do both albums? Are they really going to do the whole thing? Maybe just the first, record. And then we're talking about, wait, what else is on there? What's going to be really good? And this was the one that we were like, oh yeah, While My Guitar, that's going to be awesome. That's going to be awesome. So we were anticipating this. We were ready for it.
Good. And I'm glad Phish was ready for it too, because to me, this sounds like, musically speaking, in terms of its musicality and the technical aspects of playing it, it's a simple song, like deceptively simple.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a drummer, you don't really need to be that great of a drummer to be able to play it, but it's still one of those songs that's not easy to pull off with dignity. I had the same thought when they played Willin' years later, when they played Waiting for Columbus with the Little Feat album, that you have to get the tone just right. You have to get the tempo just right. So to me, this version of the song kind of encapsulates their ability to faithfully play cover songs, but still make it their own, because man, they just ripped this one apart in the best way possible.
I mean, there's a reason this is really the only song out of the 30 songs, 29 songs that stayed in the rotation. Every one of these costumes, 1 or 2 songs ends up in there, but it's not commonly done, but they still pull it out. And yeah, it was definitely the peak of this whole album for me, for sure.
To me, what stood out was how Fishman doesn't speed up as the guitar solo gets more and more intense, because it does. And Fishman is able to just keep it steady. I shouldn't be impressed by that, considering how familiar I am with him, but I am.
Yeah. And you have to imagine them learning all of these songs, all of this material. And there were a couple clunky moments, but they didn't really flub any one of these songs. I don't remember when they closed the voting or made this decision, but they didn't have a ton of time to learn all of this. And they're on the road the whole time. So this is, pre-show on the bus, who knows, when they rehearsed all of this, but it is really impressive how well they nailed the whole album and this in particular.
Right. And it makes it even more impressive considering the album itself, the Beatles White Album, is a studio album, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Beatles never toured with it. The Beatles certainly never played it all the way through at once. I mean, I'm not a Beatles historian, and I know there are people out there who are, but it seems like the White Album is largely seen as 4 solo albums kind of meshed together.
Yep. And a lot of production.
Yep.
A lot that was, a lot of the album was made in the, in the editing room, it's not like a recorded live to tape kind of album.
And speaking of not a lot live to tape or not a lot of editing, Revolution Number 9, I did a lot of research into this song, and I even put the quotation marks around the word song. I'm just going to put it out to you, Jeff. What is this?
So this was another definite topic of conversation. Mind you, at this point, we're getting to the end of it. Yeah, it's an hour and a half, this set. We've been in the White Album for a long time at this point. Not to take anything away from their accomplishment, but I've never sat down more during a set of Phish, other than maybe due to an injury. There was a lot of downtime in here. And so we were chatting, and then it's like, wait a minute, what are they going to do with Revolution Number 9? How are they going to do that? What are they even going to do that? Is there anything they can do? And then it starts, and it ends, it comes at the end of the album. So this is whatever Revolution 9 is. And you do hear them saying, number 9, number 9. Phish already had the vacuum out from the end of the last song. And so he's playing the vacuum. People are saying things. There's a recording going on, which one of my friends instantly recognized as the recording from the White Tape, which we always kind of referred to as the White Album,
Right.
Phish's White Album. I know its technical name is the White Tape, but at that time it was the White Album. It was
Right, and it
Phish's
wasn't
White
for
Album.
sale anywhere.
No, we, but everybody had a bootleg of it.
Right.
Everybody had a copy of it. So they're playing that, which makes perfect sense. It's the White Album. It's their White Album. Trey is on drums. Phish is saying stuff. Who knows? Mike had these cymbals, which may even be the same cymbals that Fishman pulled out at MSG for Cracklin' Rosie. And he's spinning around with the cymbals in his hands, playing them very occasionally. He looked like kind of one of those, monkeys with the cymbals that you see, the wind-up toys. The whole thing was very weird, and it was kind of dark, and it was strange. And you're just like, the whole thing was a fever dream. And then before you realize it, John Fishman's completely naked. And he says, if you become naked, and then we're like, wait, we were, like I said, we were close, but not close enough. You're like, maybe he has something on. And then you kind of, nope, he was fully nude on stage for all to see.
If you become naked,
I remember remarking that, I was pretty glad I wasn't on the rail that night, because I don't think anybody signed up for that. It was so bizarre. And then it ends, and the lights go out, and over the PA, Languedoc is playing Good Night. And there was, definite moment of, we're like, okay, is that it? What's going on? And then Brad Sands,
Yes, Brad Sands.
their old tour manager, who was dressed as Fishman that night, who
got a birthday cake.
Yeah, well, they didn't play Birthday. They didn't. That was the one song they didn't do on the album. Instead, they presented him with a birthday cake, and we sang "Happy Birthday" to Brad. He comes out and he's like, "The band will be back in about 15 minutes." And we're like, "Okay." And then it was this moment of, what did we just see? Like, what just happened?
So that's it's basically what time probably now? Probably like 2:15 a.m.
It's gotta be, yeah. I mean, when this set ends, it's gotta be, 2.
Yeah.
Or so if the show ends at 3:30, it's gotta be like getting close to 2:00 in the morning.
Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode. So it's 2:00 in the morning. The band will be back in about 15 minutes. They do come back on Phish.in, the recording that I have, which doesn't really count the band setting up, or it cuts off after the encore. It's only a 52-minute set, and I say only simply in comparison to every typical set, not counting any circumstances surrounding it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
it's like
in
the third
fairness,
set on New Year's Eve.
In fairness, we'd already gotten 2 hour-and-a-half long sets.
Right. That's what I'm saying. If you're just going for straight average length.
Yeah.
Right. But it opens, the third set does, with David Bowie, which I can't imagine how it felt to be facing David Bowie in 1994, which was probably its most experimental year, when you never knew where it would come from. Like Tom Marshall said, I remember reading, it might be the Phish book, I can't remember where this quote came from, but he said people were looking at each other toward the end of the White Album and beginning of the third set thinking, this is almost too much music in one sitting.
Through the White Album, we were hitting moments of exhaustion. I think the only thing that saved us and everybody is that, like, there was a lot of downtime. There are a lot of slow songs through the White Album. So it wasn't like a 3-set show now where you kind of have to pace yourself because you're on your feet dancing the whole time. So we at least got to rest a little bit. But I think the room needed to open with something like this. I think they needed to come out and blow it up to get everybody back up on their feet and energized for another full set of music.
Which they did. This is a good version of Bowie.
Yep, absolutely.
It has a fast jam. Again, it's mellow, but it's fast. There's a hint of an edge, but it seems like they're kind of taking it easy. Like the energy pumps up toward the end at around 10 minutes, and you could hear Page, at least on my end of the recording, my ears moved to Page, just pounding the piano. And the insanity that comes at the end of it was usual in 1994. And then there's still even more tension and release toward the end, and they drop back into the coda. it just seems like this would have been enough for me.
Yeah. I mean, again, it had elements of the patience we talked about in the first set where they let the jam develop, they let it build. It did feel like in a lot of points in this set when you listen to it, Page is kind of in the background driving a little bit more than we often hear. He was definitely, pushing a little bit. It felt to me, the end of this jam, they must have been nervous to do the White Album. There must have been a lot of nervous energy they had getting through that whole performance. So now they're back into one of their most comfortable vehicles. They know it. They know every bit of it. It's freedom for them again, where they don't have to think so much, and they just let all that energy out and explode at the end of this Bowie jam.
And that's a theme throughout this whole set. They play Bouncing Around the Room as a cool down afterward. And then our next highlight is Slave to the Traffic Light, one of their oldest songs.
Yeah.
To me, all these songs, including Slave, sound exactly perfect because, like a live one was a big part of my introduction into Phish, and all those songs, all those tracks from that live album were recorded in 1994. So to me, this is like a blanket. This is comfort food for me to hear Slave to the Traffic Light being played in the fall of 94.
And it's a beautiful Slave. I've always loved, it doesn't always get out into outer space, in Slave, but it's I always enjoy it, and I feel like it brings an energy into the room, and this one absolutely did that. Again, we have this patience, perfect composed pieces, a slow build, and then again, massive peak and explosion.
Which works perfectly for a more mellow third set after, you keep saying how exhausting and long the show has been so far. So there's nothing wrong with like pleasant, not quite ambient, but pleasant, low-key Phish music that still has its peaks, like the end of this Slave to the Traffic Light. And then to close out the third set, at least our look over it, is Run Like an Antelope. It's amazing that they still have it in them to play something like this. The jam charts describe it like this, quote, "Well played, mostly straightforward version, shows just how strong 1994 was for Antelope that this one barely makes the cut," end quote. So barely makes the cut for their jam charts, I mean. And to me, it's like, I kind of agree with that. This is a run-of-the-mill 1994 Antelope that would be a year highlight in almost any other year for Phish.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a massive one. Remember, the instruction in Doniak Schweiss was come dressed as your favorite Phish character. So there were dozens and dozens of antelopes in the room that night. People that had dressed up, that was their choice. It was an easy one to pull off. So all over the audience, you can see people with antelope horns on running up and down the aisles. I don't think there was any security there at this point. I think the staff had left.
If you're a union, you're out.
I think they had gone home. I think the first, official person we saw were the cops that were outside, and they were super chill that night too. So people are just going nuts. Whatever energy was left was all spent here. They deliver. I mean, this is, I said there wasn't a lot of Machine Gun Trey, but we get it here. He opens the hose, and I mean, they're just, they knew this was the end of the set. So whatever was left in the tank, they're dumping it all on stage at this point.
And that's go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's not a super long antelope or anything, but it has the power.
Yeah. And it closes the set, but the show is not over. There's a 3-song encore even. One song would have been enough.
Yeah.
3, but they give 3. And
well, I don't know if I'll call the middle one a song, but
true. But at least the third song of a 3-song encore is The Squirming Coil. And just to do a little bit of time stamping on here, the song proper is over at 4.5 minutes, but it's almost a 10-minute track, which means that Page's piano solo is 6 minutes long.
Yep.
You must have been dozing off during it, and not out of disrespect, but because you were being played a lullaby by a professional pianist.
remember loving every second of it. I don't, it felt more like a lullaby for sure. It was, and Page was obviously enjoying himself. He wasn't done. The band had left, typical walk off Squirming Coil, which they did a bunch of these in 94. And, Page just goes. And, we were definitely kind of collecting ourselves at this moment. There was a lot of hugging going on. Some people were walking out, but I don't remember like an exodus at all. We sat and enjoyed. And it's a beautiful, beautiful solo that he plays, just gorgeous. And I don't know if it's on the recording, but I do remember him, thanking everybody and, at the end of it, and huge applause still, it was nobody fell asleep. That's for sure.
Let me ask you this. You had to drive back to Ithaca 3.5 hours after this show, and you already told us at the beginning of our conversation, the sun was coming up. Did you make it to class that day?
I did.
Wow.
I did. And I did all the driving. Everybody else in the car was dead asleep, probably the whole ride back. And we didn't leave right away. We hung out in the lot for a while, and it was quite a scene in that lot too. Something I don't have direct knowledge of, but friends of mine didn't get in. It was a tough ticket. It was a small venue. It was not a lot of seats. And a lot of people showed up without tickets. And apparently things got a little hectic outside. There were people trying to, push their way in. People climbing up on the roof. One of our friends got in through some maintenance hatch on the roof or something. Apparently it got a little ugly outside, but the police that were there on the lot were very chill and not messing with anybody. This is pre Nitrous Mafia days, but there was plenty of that going around, and more of it than I remember seeing anywhere. And people partied for a good, we were there for a good hour probably after the show, hanging out, finding our friends that we didn't see inside, getting everybody back together, talking about what had just gone on, so we weren't, fully done. And, so we probably we didn't leave for another hour. We probably got on the road, sometime between 4:30 and 5. One of the things that is stuck in my head that I'll never forget is the first hit of Cold Air because that whole place, it's an old municipal hockey arena, it's a little small town, hockey arena. The HVAC system was not prepared for what went on in that room that night, and, it was brutally hot. And then you come out into this beautiful upstate cold fall night, and that air, I think it woke everybody back up, which is how we were able to, stick around and hang out for a while. But yeah, then it was a long ride home and back to class, and then back to another Phish show that Friday.
Well, Jeff, thank you for coming by today to take on one of the most important, consequential, turning point shows in Phish's career. I couldn't believe that no one had brought it up before, and I'm certainly glad that you did, because you certainly made the best choice possible. It was thrilling to hear about a show that I've read about, that I've listened to, that I know about, but only in the abstract. So it was wonderful to hear a first-person account of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad I got to, talk about what is definitely, the highlight of my Phish career, if you will.
And that's it for today's conversation with Jeff Paradise. But to make sure we got everything right, it is now time for the attendance bias fact check.
Attendance bias fact check.
The capacity for the Glens Falls Civic Center is 4,794 seats, with an extra 1,000 for general admission on the floor. The Horde Tour at Jones Beach was played on July 12, 1992. During this go-round, the Horde Tour consisted of Phish, Colonel Bruce Hampton and the Aquarium Rescue Unit, the Spin Doctors, Blues Traveler, and Widespread Panic. The show that Jeff attended was the band's first time playing at Jones Beach. They did play last as a headliner. They played one set, and apparently came on stage wearing paper mache masks, which they proceeded to take off and toss into the crowd after they opened with Sweet Adeline. Jeff said that his first show was on December 29, 1993 in New Haven. The 1993 holiday run was December 28th at Bender Arena in American University, December 29th at the New Haven Coliseum, December 30th at the CCCC in Portland, Maine, and then New Year's Eve at the Worcester Centrum. So if Jeff decided to go to the next show after his first, he would have needed to drive that 1984 Cadillac from New Haven to Portland in a New England snowstorm. It's a good show, but I think he made the right choice. The weird show that Jeff saw in Richmond, Virginia that, quote, nobody talks about, was played on June 30th, 1994 at the Classic Amphitheater. The show did feature a version of Harpua that went into Kung, and then the Rolling Stones' Honky Tonk Woman. It was also the same show that features Trey screeching Red Rum in reference to The Shining. When talking about the track listing of the White Album, I was correct. While My Guitar Gently Weeps is the 7th song on the album. And finally, the portion of the White Tape that was played during Revolution number 9 was He Ent to the Bog. And that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Jeff Paradise for joining me today, Phish.net for its help with the fact check, the Mockingbird Foundation for everything they do, and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by visiting www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate anything you can. You can also find Attendance Bias on social media and follow me there. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.